Sawan is different from other kids. His age, he displays no emotions and has an intelligent mind. One day, while all the other children are playing and having fun, Sawan sits alone inside a cupboard. He takes a peek outside and finds a fire extinguisher lying around, and he plays with it, determined to see what is inside. His impulsive behavior scares his classmates and they start to cry, but Sawan keeps playing without any care. When his behavior creates a mess, the teacher calls Sewin's mother. A while later, the teacher suggests to Sawan's mother to take Sewin to a therapist as he needs help. The following day, Sewin visits a doctor, who studies him through his playing habits and records their sessions. 2 months into their sessions, Sawan improves his cognitive skills. However, his social skills show no progress. Another doctor suggests a brain scan to analyze Sewin's brain functions. As he speculates that Sewin is autistic, Sewin's mother looks at the program indicated but finds the fees are very expensive. They leave the hospital, and Sewin cycles to the other end of the road. He turns back to find his mother heartbroken with the prospect of his treatment and diagnosis. She tries to cross the street towards Sewin, but unfortunately a truck hits her and she dies on the spot. Seeing this, Sewin falls unconscious on the road. The bystanders take Sewin to the hospital and the doctors discuss his lack of emotions despite watching his mother die. They prepare Sewin for an MRI and understand that although he has a powerful memory, he cannot display any emotional reaction to those memories. Soon the senior doctor visits Sewin in his room and asks him to replay the accident. Sewin tells him that the shorter version of the story is that his mother got hit by a truck while standing on the road. When the doctor asked for a more extended version, Sewin explains the accident in detail by informing them about the driver's appearance, the truck's identification, and how glasses went through his mother's head. However, his face remains expressionless while narrating the story. The doctors look at him dumbfounded and prepare for another brain scan. Soon they learn that Sewin's brain structure is twice the size of other kids his age. However, the part of his brain that responds to emotions is a quarter of the average size. When compared years later, Sewin becomes a brilliant brain scientist. By following his curious mind, he obsesses over learning about what goes on inside people's brains. Sewin talks about studying brain waves via quantum entanglement during one of his presentations. He also hopes for a day when people can understand each other through thoughts without speaking the same language. Although the panelists have reservations regarding the potential abuse of the technology, Sewin assures them that they can establish protocols to tackle any discrepancies. He also informs the audience about his pilot experiment that will happen in a few months. In the next scene at the hospital, a doctor named Namil Hong approaches Sewin with Anastasi lab rats and the latter begins his study. While recording his steps, Sewin tries to transfer the memories from one rat to the other. He initiates the brain synchronization. However, the experiment fails, and the rats die. Later, he reaches his dark and empty apartment and starts remembering his wife Yi Young and his son Doyon, who resembles Sewin and his social skills. Although Sewin was far from being the perfect husband or father, he gave them a good life. One day, Yi suggests they get Doyon in a program to help with his social skills. However, Sewin thinks the program is unnecessary as he is doing fine. Unfortunately, Doyon dies in a fire explosion. Sometimes later, and Yi is heartbroken following her son's death. She refuses to accept reality and falls into further despair. Eventually, Ji also passes away, leaving Sewin alone. In the next Sewin alone at present, Sewin continues his experiment with other test subjects. This time around, the synchronization completes, and it turns out to be a success. Sewin learns that a successful memory retrieval happens only if the brain-seek subject is dead. He then proposes a clinical trial of the experiment and asks for a fresh human corpse from the hospital. When another doctor asks about the potential recipient of the brain, Sewin volunteers himself. The doctor still doubts the board's approval for the proposal. Nevertheless, she agrees to proceed once she reviews Sewin's initial experiments. Unfortunately, the process takes a very long time to show preferable results. As a result, Sewin reverts to Namil for a dead body, and finally convinces him to get the job done. Next scene, the two doctors enter the morgue and set up the experiment. Namil retrieves a dead body and the duo place it on the table. Sewin lies on another table prepared as a brain recipient. Namil then turns the machine on and the process begins. Suddenly, Sewin gets a vision where he sees blood splattered on the screen and someone waving a huge stone at him. On the other hand, the machine begins to beep rapidly and the mill panics. He quickly turns off all the devices and starts compressing Sewin's chest to get him up. After numerous attempts, Sawan gains consciousness and informs Namel that he saw something, but can't remember. Later, Namel drives his colleague home, who is still thinking about the experiment. After Namel leaves, a stranger approaches Sewin and reveals himself as a private investigator named Kang Mu Lee, and asks Sewin about a person named Junkie Lim. But Sawan has no idea about him. Then Kang Mu asks him about Yi's death, but Sawan simply asks him to leave. With no options left, the detective obliges. The next morning, Sewin wakes up to the sound of this doorbell ringing, and finds Lieutenant Jae-eun Cho and her colleagues standing outside. They reveal they need to talk to Jae and he lets them in. Sewin is confused about the officer's purpose of the visit, but just then they ask him about Junkie Lim Jae-eun. Then informs him that his wife and Lim were close, and that Lim was found dead the previous night. Sewin is confused and remembers Kangmu asking about the same person. He then finds a visiting card of Jock Wang's security officer Gwen Ryalan and calls the number to inquire about Junkie Lim. As Sewin leaves his house, he keeps thinking about everyone asking about Lim. He then sneaks up to the morgue with his equipment and finds Junkie Lim's corpse. Soon Sewin gets the body and begins his brain synchronization process to understand the situation. The experiment starts, and C1 sees Junkie and his wife calling for their kid Heejin, who runs around. Suddenly the scene changes, and he sees somebody stabbing Junkie Lim. Later, Sawan records that his vitals were normal during the experiment. However, he cannot determine the process of success or failure. Sewin fails to recall the clear pictures from Lim's memories despite his memory power. Later, Sawan asks his colleagues to join him for food. Shocking everyone, Namel follows him out to the same restaurant Sawan was in earlier. The bartender is confused to see Sewin with a company, and when he orders a beer with his food, the former is shocked. The next scene, Sawan enters his lab whistling and playing some jazz music. He grabs his drink and remembers Namel asking him about being left-handed. Sawan is confused to find the new change, and realizes that due to brain synchronization, his motor skills and preferences have also changed. He notes that the process causes the talents and quirks of the subject to transfer to the recipient along with the memories to remind himself of his habits. Sewin makes a list on the board and writes that he is left-handed, doesn't like alcohol, and doesn't listen to music. A while later, as Sewin is about to get in his car, he sees someone standing nearby. However, when he glances back, he sees no one. Confused, Sawan gets in the car and drives back home. On the way, he feels strange as he keeps seeing an unknown person standing on the road with some injuries and a girl in the backseat of his car. Sawan gets startled when all these figures disappear in a flash of a second. Suddenly, Sewin gets a headache and nausea. He somehow parks his car in the road and gets out of it. At this point, Sewin is gagging and retching when he feels bugs crawl up his leg. He panics and speculates the whole experience is a side effect of the synchronization. Suddenly, Sewin sees a Hyzen standing in front of him. He reveals that Doyeon is alive. In the next scene, Sewin reaches home and opens the door to his basement. As he gets down, he keeps thinking about the girl saying Doyeon is alive and how Jae-yi believed the same. He then goes inside a room that looks like a lab and apologizes to Jae-yi, who is revealed to be alive. Following this, he begins the brain synchronization with his wife to find out about Doyeon. Yi wakes Sewon in the morning and they watch their son play, seeing Doyeon go outside. Sewon rushes towards him, but Yi stops her husband and tells him that Dojun is safe without him. Suddenly, she starts grasping for air and her expression changes. Ji then falls into a pool of blood. The pool engulfs her and Sewon is alone in a blood-filled room. Soon Ji emerges again, but this time she has become old and wrinkly. She then begs her husband to find their son. Meanwhile, Sewon suddenly wakes up in his basement where an unconscious Ji struggles to breathe. Fortunately, he stops the device and Ji becomes stable. After this, he records his observation and says that the synchronization was only successful for a brief time. As JG's brain started having seizures, he also realizes that the synchronization was difficult to control because Ji is still alive. He then swears to find their son one way or another before he leaves the room. The following morning, Officer Jae-eun and her colleagues visit Sewon. She confronts him for hiding Ji's suicide attempt and suspects his intentions. However, he denies the allegations and leads the officers to the basement, where Jae-yi is undergoing her treatment. Despite this, Jin still suspects Sewon of murdering Junkie Lim. As the officers leave, Sewon hears footsteps echoing in the distance. He then follows the source and sees Heejin run behind their cat Mika. However, when he gets outside, she disappears suddenly. Sewon's brain synchronizes with Lim and Jae and he sees his wife and son in a car ride with Heejin and Lim. At night, Sewon meets up with Kang Moo and inquires about why Junkie Lim hired him. Kang-moo replies that Jim suspected Sewon of killing his wife. Confused, Sewon asked Kang-moo about his wife and Lim's relationship. The detective reveals that the two met in a special clinic for children. Suddenly, Sewon grunts with pain as the loud ringing resumes, and he sees his wife and son with Lim and Heejin in the clinic. The adults watch their kids get along and look like a single family. Sewon returns to the present, breathing heavily as if very confused. Kang-moo watches him. He then asks about Heejin's whereabouts, and Kang-moo assumes that she might be with her relatives. In the next scene, the doer reaches Lim's house and enters quietly through the police barricade. Kang-moo is shocked to see Se-wen cracking the front door with a coat. As he peeks inside the kitchen, he suddenly gets stabbed by a stranger, but realizes that it is Lim's memories. Kang-moo is confused about Se-won's behavior and the letter explains everything to him. Shocked, Kang-moo asks him to recall all the memories, but Se-won replies that it is difficult because everything is tangled inside his head. He then goes inside the Jin's room and finds a lot of drawings of art on the wall. One particular drawing causes Se-won to hallucinate. Heejin screaming. Soon he sees JGI placing Mika on Heejin's arms, as she informs a little girl of Do-yoon's death. However, Heejin mentions that Dian is still alive, which shocks both Jae and Lim back to the present. Se-won pulls out a box from under the bed and finds an envelope addressed to someone's grandma with a location on it. After this, the two head out, but just then they spot Miko lying dead nearby. While Kang-moo is taken aback, Sewon mentions that he will brain sync with the cat. Following this, the two depart and Sewon assures Kang-moo that he will let him know if anything comes up. Elsewhere, a man buys a few box cutters and some tape from a store and drives away with his friend. They then reach a house, where Heejin is sleeping. She wakes up hearing some rustling sounds and gets out to see the two strangers wrapping some corpses in body bags. Before she can call for help, the strangers grab her and flee. Meanwhile, a doctor performs a post-mortem on Lim's corpse in Jae-yoon's presence. The doctor informs her that Lim was stabbed severely in the neck and chest. The doctor also reveals a hole in the dead body's head, which was carefully made after Lim's death. They monitor the security footage and are shocked to see Sewon walk in with his equipment. Elsewhere, Sewon takes the dead cat to his lab and secretly prepares for the sync. The experiment begins and Sewon sees his son play with Mika, when suddenly he sees two strangers stab Lim and drive away. Se-won lies on the floor and groans in pain when he sees the stranger's car run over Mika. The following day, Namil finds his colleague sleeping on the floor and wakes him up. He gets scared seeing a dead cat lying over. However, Sewon asks him to clean up the mess and dispose of the cat. He then heads to the address on the envelope. On the way, he records the observations during the sync and says that he was able to hear sharp noises and see someone stab him. Suddenly, Sewon sees a few police cars quickly pass by. He stops his car and walks to the address, but sees a crowd outside the house. Sewon asks a stranger about the commotion and learns that the old woman residing in the house lost her son and granddaughter. In Seoul, Se-won walks away thinking about all the strange occurrences happening. As of late just then, the cat's skill make him catch a baseball. Without looking, Sewon also remembers the car's license plate and looks around. He then crouches down to see things from Mika's perspective and sees the killer's car following. He calls Officer Jayan and requests her to search the license plate number. She summons him to the station, but he assures her that he shall find Jin if he gets her help. Sewon also informs her that Lim's killer and Hyejin's abductor might be the same. Jian is confused by the claims and starts doubting, but when she searches for the license plate number, she is shocked to see Kang-moo's profile pop up. She immediately calls Sewon and reveals that the car belongs to Kang-moo. When Se-won tries to assert that he is the killer, Jaeon replies that it is impossible as he died before Lim was murdered. Hearing this, Sewon is left speechless. The episode ends at the doorbell rings, and when Sewon opens the door, Kang-moo is standing outside. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notifications. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day ahead.